Chapter 1, The Moment. It was 1986, and my entire grade school was crowded into the gym to watch the launch of the Challenger. Shuttle launches were a big deal back then. Astronauts were cool, the height of physical and mental perfection, mad skills in advanced sciences and practical engineering. It was every kid's dream to be an astronaut, even the ones who wouldn't admit it in public. Our principal, a middle-aged dude, who had failed out of flight school and ended up in the public school system, had just finished giving a very passionate speech about how if we applied ourselves we could all become astronauts. Challenger lifted off, thick plumes of dense smoke billowing from its thrusters. We all cheered as the screen showed the shuttle lifting ponderously into the sky. Every kid in the gym wanted, at that moment, to be an astronaut. The shuttle exploded seconds later. They never found more than a finger of the 7-person crew. That finger was burnt, so identification was impossible. It shook the nation, the entire planet. For the first time we all realized sitting on top of 500,000 gallons of rocket fuel, and then igniting it, might not be the most successful of survival instincts. I wanted to be an astronaut more than ever. Chapter 2, The Mission. Captain Johnston, meet Captains Schilling and Smith, Captain Jeff Merrick introduced. Captain, I nodded to Schilling. Captain, I nodded to Smith. Captain, Schilling nodded back. He looked as serious as a brick passing through an anus. Captain, Smith smiled. Her smile indicated amusement, like somebody had told a fart joke only she heard. Captain, Merrick continued. Captain, I nodded to Merrick. Fuck off, Mike. We don't have to do this every time we meet new crew. I beg to differ, Jeff, but we do this and everybody stays alive. That's a superstition, Jeff said. That's what Gordon said before the last mission, I replied. Who? Captain Smith asked. Zon first? I replied. Colonel, Jeff waved over an imposing man with a square jaw and equally severe brush cut. He marched, not sauntered, strolled, or walked, but marched over. Colonel, this is Captain Mike Johnston, Jeff introduced. I held out my hand to shake. The colonel looked at it like it was a piece of diseased roadkill taken from the highway. You're supposed to salute a superior officer, the colonel said. I raised hand to my temple with the tips of my fingers making the briefest of contact. Then I flicked my fingers away, more like removing lint than paying a compliment to a higher-ranking pilot. That's the best you can do? The colonel asked. Today, I admitted. The other 3 officers took a step backward, to get out of the way when fists started to fly. You're that hotshot star, who breezed through the initiation program with a perfect score, the colonel snarled. You're the type who thinks you're better than the rest of us because you started with a leg up. The only difference between you and me, I countered, is that you've got 1 more pip on your shoulders. Actually it's 2 pips, he replied, and held a deadpan face for 10 seconds before he broke out laughing. It's all right. He's one of us. The colonel wrapped his arm around my shoulder in a half hug as he shook me more than jet turbulence. Welcome to Rogers Rangers, he continued. We're the best fucking flight crew in the program. That's why you're here, Mike. We need a pilot who isn't afraid of risk and won't crap their pants when the shit hits the fan. Tabitha will get you debriefed. Come with me, Captain Smith ordered, and cocked her head toward a hallway. I followed, noticing that the curves of her body were not hidden by the square cut of her uniform. You can stop looking at my ass, she said as we passed a window which showed our reflection. Maybe if you stop wiggling it so much, I suggested. In here, she held open a door. I had to squeeze by her as she blocked the entrance. She made no motion to move out of the way. We came perilously close to each other, and there was the faint whiff of perfume coming off her throat. Is the team always like this with new crew? I asked as I sat at the only table in a private briefing room. Like what? She sat on the edge of the table. Her rump landed on the pad of paper there for me to take notes. I picked up the pen and tugged the pad, but it didn't move. She may have been curvy, but she also had the dense muscle of a fighter. Jerky and flirty? I answered. She got up, and moved around the table to a whiteboard and picked up a whiteboard marker. You know what we're up against, Mike? Space exploration is a big thing, but it's too slow. We're outgrowing the planet, and if we don't start exporting people off-world to someplace habitable, they're going to start eating each other. They already have, I said. There was an article in the morning paper. A half-desiccated corpse was found under some bushes in the park. It was partially eaten. The bite marks were human. Vagrants eating vagrants is only the start, Tabitha agreed. We need to get people off this rock as soon as possible. She drew a circle on the board, and then marked a point on each end of the diameter. What's the shortest distance between 2 points on a globe? There's 2 routes, I answered. Great circles against rotation over the poles, or you could blast through the core of the planet. I laughed at my joke. There was only one route, great circles. Everybody knew that. Exactly, Tabitha smiled, and drew a dotted line through the center of the circle. Space is an expanding bubble. She drew another circle. We don't know what it's expanding into, or out from, but we do know that going through the middle of the unknown is faster and cheaper than flying around it. That's impossible, I laughed. We've been having probes do it successfully for 5 years now, she replied. It's called the Orion Project. It's not been publicly announced because the idea of dimensional travel, we have no other words for it, scares the crap out of everybody. So our mission? I asked. Probes have been sent everywhere, she answered. We know the locations of hundreds of habitable planets. It's time for a manned mission. You're our pilot. You're shitting me. I exclaimed. I shit you not. We launch in 2 days. Drink? Drink? I paused. We launch in 2 days. We might never come back. I intend to make my 48-hour pass epic. Do you want to go for a drink, some dinner, and then have sex? Sure, I answered. Chapter 3, The Launch. 2 days later, 12 pounds and several $100s lighter, I reported to the command center with 3 minutes to spare. Glad you could make it, Merrick slurred out of the corner of his mouth as I fell into attention beside him. 3 minutes, dude, I whispered back. 2 minutes, the colonel looked me over. You haven't shaven. I've never shaved before a launch, I explained. I've walked away from every landing so far. Fair enough, he said. You'll be shaved for the press photo when we get back? Got my kit here, I tapped the leg pocket of my flight suit. All right, men, and lady, suit up. The colonel ordered. Getting into a space suit isn't that difficult. It's more like being a live mannequin. The crew put it on me and hooked up all the tubing. In the end, the 5 of us looked like giant snowmen. Even Smith's curves, which I had memorized over the last 2 days, were absorbed by the rolls of white padding. We took the long walk. It was really a short walk to the launch station once we got off the bus. An elevator to the top of the shuttle, but the walk across the tarmac was always a press frenzy. The shuttle waited, poised on its thrusters, with the derrick leading to the flight deck. Mount up! The colonel shouted as we each climbed onto the launch elevator. It was a dog and pony show. There was no need for us to ride an open elevator all the way up the outside of our launch ship, but it looked impressive for the newspapers. We got to the entry hatch, went inside all akimbo as the floor was 90 degrees against the way we were standing. We crawled to our seats. These aren't standard, I looked at the controls. Mike, you did fine on the simulators, the colonel advised. It's a trans-dimensional ship. What did you expect, a button labeled hyperspace? Can I call you Chewie? I turned to Schilling in the co-pilot chair. What? He asked. I'll take that as a no. All right, pre-flight checks. I'll issue the orders if you don't mind, Colonel Rogers said. With all due respect, sir, I'm at stick. This bird is mine. Mike, he started. Stephen, I interrupted. You're right, he agreed. Please continue. Remember, you're in charge of the ship, but I'm in charge of the mission and I'm the third pilot. Fourth pilot, Jeff coughed. The fourth pilot in case anything happens to two of you. All right Rangers, let's do this smooth, and by the numbers. It was a textbook liftoff. Nothing went wrong. We cruised out of the upper atmosphere in 8.5 minutes. We left gravity behind. We were walking the Milky Way in all its splendor. We drifted in flight, weightless, and looked at the unobstructed stars. There was nothing between the pinpricks in the firmament and us. Ready to swing for the moon, I announced, as I laid in the course. Make it so, Stephen answered. I turned around to look at him, so did Jeff and Tabitha. What? Shillings asked as he noticed the lull in conversation. Course laid in, I announced. Hitting boosters in 3, 2, 1. I squeezed the trigger on the throttle. It's a little more complicated than that, but essentially that's what I did. We jumped from 28,000 kilometers an hour to near 70,000 as we vectored in on the moon. It might sound like it took seconds, but we were minutes in flying, and then we slung around the moon picking up speed and were flung out the loop into deep space faster than any human had ever flown before. We were near 0.001% the speed of light, or slightly more than 1,000,000 kilometers an hour. Somebody check the whales, I joked. Everybody chuckled, except Schilling. What whales? He asked. We flew until we had gone far enough to start thinking about opening the dimensional portal and seeing what would happen. Here's the thing about space, unless the shit hits the fan it's really boring most of the time. There's black as far as the eye can see, punctuated by far distant stars that we could never reach in our lifetime unless the dimensional drive worked. All right, Stephen announced, let's start the pre-warp drill. Warp? I asked. We're folding space and time. What else would you call it? We went through checklist after checklist as we sped into the void. Excellent. Everybody got their letters to God? Roger, came the unanimous response from everyone except me. Mike, Colonel Rogers started. I didn't hear a Roger from you on the letters. I don't carry them, I answered. I never have. I'm an atheist. Dumbstruck faces looked at me from every seat. Shillings looked like he was trying to back away from me while strapped in his acceleration couch. What do you mean you don't carry letters to God? Tabitha finally asked. I don't believe in that superstition. I never have, and I never will, I answered. But if we die on this flight? Jeff started. I was 12 when Challenger went down in flames, I explained. I decided at that moment there was no God. I dedicated my life to being an astronaut and I don't think God has helped me one bit. I'm not going to honor a deity that chooses to sacrifice the noble with a demand for blood. Everyone, pull out a letter, Rogers ordered. Each of the crew pulled out a wad of letters, and withdrew one from their pile. Hand it over, Stephen nodded to me as he pressed an envelope at me. This isn't necessary, I protested at the small pile hovering in my lap. I quickly gathered them up before they played havoc with the instruments. In your pocket now, Stephen ordered. Sir? I asked. In your pocket, he enunciated each word like a threat. Shillings looked at me with loathing, Smith displayed concern, and Jeff looked at me like he was seeing who I really was for the first time. Fine, I put the letters in a thigh pocket. It's not necessary. Everything is going to work out. You violated our most sacred tradition. It had better work, Rogers warned as the perimeter alarm went off. That was fast, but I guess at 1,000 clicks an hour life can go by quick. Everybody in crash position. We fronted our seats and made sure all the redundant straps were a little tighter, and therefore less redundant. On my mark, activated the hyperdrive. 1, 2, 3. Mark. I slammed the throttle all the way back and pressed the button for hyperspace. Sort of. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's essentially what we did. A rip opened in front of us. A tear in the fabric of space, that we gleefully flew into. And then there was an all-enveloping whiteness. Chapter 4, The Delivery. Where am I? I looked around. My voice reverberated like sound on a wave guide, bouncing around inside my skull. I was standing in my flight suit with the pack of letters in my hand. My EVA suit wasn't on me. All around me was white, as far as I could see. I could have been in a box only 5 feet across or miles on a side. There was no horizon and nothing to discern the vanishing point. It was like the opposite of being in space. I turned in a complete circle, and way, far away, I saw a black dot. I started walking toward the dot because it was the only thing that wasn't white nothing. I walked for an eternity. I looked at my watch. It was stopped. I kept walking toward the dot and it got bigger and bigger and started to take form, but it still seemed miles away. Then suddenly I was right in front of it. It was a woman dressed in a business suit sitting at a desk. She indicated the visitor chair in front of the desk, so I sat down. "Good day, Captain Johnston," the woman smiled at me, but not really a friendly smile. More like the smile a cat gives a mouse. "How do you know my name?" I asked. "Mike, I know everything about you. Your hopes, your dreams, your deepest desires. That cathartic moment in 1986, when Challenger exploded, and you started your lifelong suicidal mission to be the best and demand answers from God." "I wanted to be an astronaut," I said. "Because?" she asked. "I wanted to see if there was more out there, something beyond the scope of man." "Meet God," she replied. "Same thing. So, my little atheist, what do you want to know?" "You're God?" I asked. "Yes," she murmured. "I thought God was a man?" "That's just one of the many things your people got wrong," she replied. "Here's a tip, don't send a burning bush if you want to talk to people. They're all like the talking bush is on fire. Get some water, and don't listen to the shrubbery when it's trying to tell them something important." "You're God?" I asked again. "Mike, we've been over that. I am God. I am the Alpha and Omega, yada yada yada, heaven and earth, Adam and Steve, all that stuff." "Adam and Steve?" I asked. "Yeah, that's another oops on your part. We won't get into it, but originally your species were hermaphrodites. I did the binary thing later, to make things simpler. It didn't work out that way. I should have stuck with the original design, but by then it was too late." "Okay. These are for you," I handed over the letters. "Thank you," she replied as she took the letters. "I'll read them later. I know what they say already. Omnipotence has its perks, but it's polite to go through the motions." "Why am I here?" I asked the question I was most afraid to ask. "Good question. Why do you think you're here?" "I think I'm here because God is fucking with me. Mike, so here's the thing, I kind of left your species alone for a while, because I've got a lot of other projects on the go. I honestly didn't think your kind was going to make it past the atomic age, so shelved it and decided to look in on you in a couple of centuries. Then you started sending probes through my backyard. It was annoying, but tolerable. Then you marched in with your dimension-hopping shuttle. Now I have a problem." "The underside of the universe is heaven?" I asked. "Not exactly, but for our purposes that'll suffice. If I tried to explain it in a way you would understand, it would be like screaming at an ant not to be an ant. The point is, you're messing up the universe with your experiment. I can't let that happen." "So you're going to kill us," I stated. "No. Well, the rest of your crew is dead and happy about it, by the way. You, on the other hand, are an atheist, so you came here instead of getting admitted to heaven." "This is purgatory?" I asked. "It's a waiting room while I decide what to do with you. Purgatory is another oops your people came up with at the end of the 13th century. Here's what is going to happen, you are the next prophet." "Prophet?" I repeated. "Yeah," she said. "You know, spread the word of God, bring peace so that you can all cooperate on that third rock from the sun. Try colonizing the moons of Jupiter rather than go to my other planets. I can't have you screwing up other people until you learn to play nice." She stood up and walked over to my chair. She leaned down and kissed me, and it wasn't a kiss like my mother would give. There. Now you're blessed by God. You've been given special powers which should help you in your quest. Any last words? What do I do? I asked. I'll think you'll find what you don't do is as important as what you do. She snapped her fingers and a rift opened beside the desk. She simply gestured toward it. I got up, and stepped through, but I swatted her on the ass in passing. It's not every day I was going to get to grope God. I stepped through the portal, and found myself at headquarters in a media blitz. And we lost contact with the shuttle, the director said at the lectern just as I stepped out of nothing beside her. Dead silence rang through the room. All eyes were on me, the sole survivor of an experimental mission who appeared out of nowhere. Captain Johnston? A reporter recovered first. What happened? I nodded to the reporters and looked at the director. She waved me to the microphone. I stood behind the lectern and cleared my throat. I paused for a moment, and then said, "Hi. I've got a message from God."